electrolyzer to hydrogen, hydrogen to fuel cell, to electricity, to electric vehicle. But your path is different. So walk us through that.
We use aluminum, water, and sodium hydroxide, and we put it within a boiler system. So that chemical reaction generates hydrogen, but it also generates heat, enough heat to actually run a steam turbine. So that steam turbine is given two choices. It can either charge electric battery vehicles or it can distribute its electricity to the grid. The hydrogen itself is also given two choices. One, we can run it through a fuel cell to be made into even more electricity, or it can be contained, compressed, and dispensed to a vehicle.
Today on the Clean Power Hour, hydrogen for long-haul trucking and transportation. My guest today is the founder and CEO of Ally Power. Welcome to the show, Joe Alfred.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
It's been great getting to know you a little bit over the last couple of months. I'm very fond of the hydrogen economy. As most of my listeners know, it's a double edge. There's gray hydrogen, there's blue hydrogen, there's green hydrogen, and there's purple hydrogen. And I'm most interested in green hydrogen because that is the lowest carbon footprint source of hydrogen. But in any event, there's a lot of things you can do with hydrogen. It is the fusion reactor in the sky. And here on Earth, we can use it for transportation, heavy industry, thermal applications, and long-term storage for generating electricity, which then you can do many different things with. And so because we have a plethora of renewable energy, 10,000 times more solar, for example, than we use in all of our endeavors as a human species, we need long-term storage, and hydrogen can be utilized as a storage technology. So for our listeners, tell us about Ally Power and how you came to found this company.
Absolutely. So Ally Power is looking to break into the market in two ways. One, through our hydrogen and electric gas station model, and the second through our retrofit model. So the hydrogen and electric gas station is a station that can produce both hydrogen and electricity at the same time. So instead of a electrolyzer, which takes electricity and splits the hydrogen and oxygen of water, we utilize a boiler system that actually generates the hydrogen and the necessary heat to run a steam turbine on site. So we want to utilize this chemical reaction that we use in order to produce that electricity and hydrogen to dispense to hydrogen fuel cell vehicles and charge electric battery vehicles at the same time. We really see the role of electricity and hydrogen as complementary because it does have that storage effect, as Tim was alluding to earlier, in that you can take electricity that's from the grid and store it as hydrogen to be dispensed to vehicles or as just long-term storage. So it does have multiple use cases. And you could use a small-scale electrolyzer as the medium by which you store that electricity within hydrogen. In terms of the retrofit model, we do see the hardest to decarbonize in terms of vehicles and within the transportation sector being one of the leading producers of greenhouse gases. The hardest to decarbonize are the class 3 through 8 trucks and buses. So that's your real issue point, and that we have a solution that is going to take an existing vehicle, retrofit it, take out the existing internal combustion engine, whether that's gasoline or diesel, and put in a fuel cell so that it can run on the hydrogen that we actually generate from the stations. So we see both of these business models feeding each other in that they can provide the necessary demand in terms of the vehicles, which there's a lot more vehicles than the stations that we're going to build. And the fact that we're going to have the vehicles that are going to run on the hydrogen, then it's going to necessitate the fact that we're going to have that hydrogen infrastructure. So both of these business models go in tandem with one another, and we are working on both simultaneously.
And before we give our listeners a little more background on yourself, what is the state of the company as it is? How old are you, and where are you in your journey?
Sure. We are a 2-year-old company. We started actually in November of 2019. My personal journey with this concept was 11 years in the running while I was still in law school. I was actually making hydrogen this way at my local high school. And this is really the genesis of the company came from those humble origins. And we are in the middle of a Series A raise, $40 million. We are in discussions with a couple of interested parties who would be able to fund part or all of that $40 million raise.
Excellent. So, angels and other investors, take note. They are doing a seed range right now of $40 million. So, this is a great opportunity for investors. Joe, how did you get so interested in hydrogen? You know, every high school chemistry class, or maybe the advanced version of such, does the famous converting water to hydrogen gas and oxygen gas, and then you light that test tube that's full of hydrogen and it just goes poof. And it's pretty amazing, right? That you can make hydrogen from water, H2O. And then when you burn the hydrogen, you're creating water. And so it is truly a very clean fuel once you get the fuel, but your chemistry is a little different. So talk a little bit about hydrogen chemistry and how you arrived at your particular chemistry for Ally.
Certainly. So there was a DOE article on this particular chemical reaction, and it was detailing all the reasons why it's not going to work. And the reasons why it wasn't going to work is because they are going to utilize this chemical reaction within the vehicle itself. And that was a lot of the issues. So the fact that it created heat meant that you had to have particular parts within the vehicle in order to absorb the heat or mediate the heat. The fact that it was going to create a byproduct, which would then have to be stored somewhere, and then, during the fueling or the would have to be removed from the vehicle. The fact that it would have to be refueled by so much aluminum and so much sodium hydroxide, that was also an issue in terms of the ability for the vehicle to be refueled in an efficient manner. Sodium hydroxide being a pH of 14, very caustic base, that it's a very difficult chemical to work with. So what we thought of is, instead of having this chemical reaction within the vehicle, have it at the station. Because there are vehicles that can just run on hydrogen in a compressed manner, and we can make that hydrogen at the station, compress it, and then dispense it to a vehicle. But because we're moving that chemical reaction from the vehicle itself to the station, you can exercise the heat component as well, and you can maximize it so that you can run a steam turbine. So there have been other ideas in this line before, and this is where being a lawyer helps in terms of the patent process and finding out that search. The previous ideas did not really consider the idea of a stationary hydrogen generator that also has the capacity to generate electricity and absorb electricity from the grid. Because what's happening now, which wasn't happening in 2007 when it was first patented, is there's a lot of solar and wind electricity on the grid. And that is causing the supply of electricity to outstrip demand. And we need a place to store that extra electricity. So the station can act as not just a hydrogen refueling station, not just as an EV charging station, but it can also act as a storage location for that extra electricity. So that's really where the genesis of the company and where the genesis of the idea came from. In addition to my legal training, I also spent 4 years in the automotive industry, learning really how the internal combustion engine worked and how exactly could I connect this idea that I had and I couldn't shake to the current technology that powers our vehicles. So this really brought upon me the idea of utilizing the fuel cell as a retrofit. So I am talking a lot with the University of Maryland about pilot projects that we could do together. And one of the professors that I'm working with is now also on the Maryland Clean Energy Center alongside me. And what he was saying is that, what you're suggesting really isn't novel. We know how to make a vehicle, an existing vehicle, run on hydrogen. That's not really novel. And but we're not doing it. And the reason why we're not doing it is because the station infrastructure is not there. So let's connect the dots and build out the station infrastructure and retrofit the vehicles at the same time.
Let's back up a little bit. And there's two things here that we really need to clarify. There's how you manufacture hydrogen and then store it for access to transportation. And then there's ways of leveraging hydrogen for transportation, because there's multiple pathways here on both sides of that equation. And I think you kind of glossed over what exactly is your chemistry. You're not using electrolyzers to take water and produce hydrogen and oxygen. That is one route. I have a commercial electrolyzer facility in my hometown now of Urbana, Illinois, that is being used to fuel hydrogen fuel cell buses that use hydrogen to generate electricity to run an electric vehicle or an electric bus in that case. So that's probably the route that, or the chemistry and then the technology, electrolyzer to hydrogen, hydrogen to fuel cell to electricity to electric vehicle. But your path is different. So walk us through that.
Certainly. So the electrolyzer model requires about 3 times as much electricity to power that fuel cell vehicle at the end as it would to just charge a normal electric battery vehicle. So what we do differently is we use aluminum, water, and sodium hydroxide, and we put it within a boiler system. So that chemical reaction generates hydrogen, but it also generates heat at the same time, enough heat to actually run a steam turbine. So that steam turbine is given 2 choices through the transformer at the station. It can either charge electric battery vehicles or it can distribute its electricity to the grid. The hydrogen itself that we generate from the boiler is also given 2 choices. One, we can run it through a fuel cell, a stationary fuel cell that's on site as well, to be made into even more electricity, or it can be contained, compressed, and dispensed to a vehicle. So the different vehicles that can go and to our station are both the passenger fuel cell vehicles as well as the truck and bus vehicles. So this is an important distinction, that the trucks are going to be pressurized at 5,000 psi and the passenger vehicles are going to be pressurized at 10,000 psi. So there's going to be different pressures for different vehicles that actually go on site to our station.
So aluminum and sodium hydroxide, where do you get those chemicals, and how does the overall supply chain make economic sense versus water to hydrogen? Because it is, it is kind of apples and oranges.
Certainly. So one of the key things that we're going to utilize in terms of our feedstock is the fact that the aluminum is going to be scrap aluminum. We want to do this for a couple of different reasons. One, the scrap aluminum has already had the carbon dioxide baked in just the production of the aluminum. There are now ways to make the aluminum without producing any carbon dioxide that the aluminum industry has pioneered, and we think that's great, and we believe that all aluminum production, you should go in that direction as a lot of industries are decarbonizing. But the scrap aluminum is already made, it's already here. There's 65 million tons that is generated every single year. So if we utilize scrap aluminum and we transport that aluminum to the station itself in a vehicle that is zero emission, what has been stated to us is that there will be it will be viewed as a renewable green hydrogen way to generate both hydrogen and electricity. The reason being is because the aluminum is already here. It's made. This is now its second use case because it's scrap. So that's on the aluminum side. On the sodium hydroxide side, that is just electrolyzed seawater. So there's no carbon dioxide there that's generated. So if we utilize the vehicles that are zero emission, the whole process is going to be determined to be green and renewable in terms of hydrogen generation and electric generation.
Where does the sodium hydroxide come from, though? It's a feedstock for other industries, right?
It is. And there's a surplus of it. So we generate more sodium hydroxide than we actually need. So because it's mass produced already, it is available to be utilized to reduce the aluminum and water into hydrogen and heat and sodium aluminate.
Okay.
So where, in terms of the price point and how we get to the level that we have, in the electricity and water model, electricity and water are your two main feedstocks. And it's dependent on the electricity price and obviously the price of the water and what you have in terms of the scarcity of the water in where the station is actually there. In our model, it's a little bit more complicated because you're having two different commodities like aluminum and sodium hydroxide, which are more like finished products. Scrap aluminum, it loses a lot of its value from its original price of around $2.50 per kilogram. And we can get that on the market somewhere in the range of 30 cents to 50 cents per kilogram for scrap aluminum. So there's a significant cost savings there. But really, how are we going to get to the price point in terms of the modeling for where we want to be in terms of hydrogen is really through the retrofit model. And we can do that in a number of different ways. A retrofit as a service model provides the ability for you to take the existing vehicle's internal components and take them out and then resell them on the existing market. That's something that an electrolyzer-based model doesn't have. There are also internal parts within a truck or bus which are very valuable, and we plan to be a commodities buyer as well as a commodities seller. So there's going to be a price point difference between where we buy the actual commodities and then where we can actually sell them to the stations. So it's a business to business to consumer model, similar to the oil and gas industry, where the oil isn't really bought by the gas station owner and then sold directly to the consumer. There's a few more steps within that. So we're going to be a little bit more complicated, just like the previous industry.
So one of the measures, though, at the end of the day is what is the cost per kWh of electricity that you're getting, right? Because with battery electric vehicles, the target that I've seen lately is $60 per kWh. That is a magic number that once battery electric vehicles hit that consistently, the internal combustion engine is no longer competitive. And, so what we see right now with the Model 3 and the Nissan Leaf are in that $60 to $100 range, I think. I'm not sure if anyone has gotten below it, but they're knocking on that door. What is the value of electricity that you are knocking on, do you think?
Certainly, and we see the EVs proliferating in the market in terms of the passenger vehicle market. And we want to acknowledge that and also have the charging capacity at our stations to be able to supply the electricity to the vehicles that people and consumers are going to buy and want to buy and have bought. So we do see the both a retail and a wholesale price for electricity occurring. So for the EV owners, they will charge their vehicle at around 17 cents per kilowatt hour, which is significantly higher than what you would just pay for a wholesale price of electricity in terms of, and I'm just speaking about the California market right now, but we have an average price point in terms of California of around 2.5 cents, which is one of the very low. But there's a discrepancy there for a retail market to occur. So when people think about making a huge investment for a hydrogen station and having EV chargers there alongside it, they really want to know what the wholesale price of electricity could be, and then what's the retail price of electricity going to be, because within that space, there's going to be a similar market spread to what gas stations have already provided to ICE vehicles.
Okay, but isn't there an analogy between the BEV price and the hydrogen fuel cell price of kWh? Because 2 cents would mean everybody was driving a hydrogen fuel cell vehicles like the Mirai. And we forgot to touch on, so don't forget that point. I want to drill down on this, the cost of energy, but also that, today the consumer vehicle, the Mirai, which is a Toyota vehicle in California only, uses a fuel cell. There's also combustion technologies. You can retrofit or create an internal combustion engine that'll actually burn hydrogen. And that is another strategy that you and I have discussed. I think that Toyota is going to come to market with a combustion engine that runs on hydrogen. So let's touch on both of those. But if batteries are hitting 60 as a threshold, where is hydrogen in that range? Because at the end of the day, the battery is just a device that stores electricity, right? And the hydrogen is a device, so to speak, that stores ultimately electricity, right?
Yes. And I would like to point out at this point that because there are Mirais within the California market, there are also Honda and Hyundai products as well. There is a market for those vehicles because they have a $15,000 or a 3-year worth of fuel that can be utilized at any of the hydrogen stations that are going to be there. In terms of BEV versus a hydrogen fuel cell, it really depends also on the market segment that we're talking about, right? Because if you're talking about class 3 through 8 trucks and buses, that's a totally different market segment. They require a whole lot more electricity if you just wanted to electrify everything. So batteries price is certainly one factor, but also the weight of the battery, the weight of the battery cooling system, all of these are compounded, as well as the use case of the end vehicle. So if we are at a 300-mile range vehicle, if we're at a 500-mile range vehicle, if we're at a 2100-mile range vehicle, the use case is really going to determine as well what the end technology is going to be in terms of transitioning to zero emission.
Yeah, so speak to that, because for passenger vehicles, hydrogen, according to Mark Jacobson, is 2 to 4 times less efficient, which is why you're not going to see a plethora of hydrogen vehicles, which is why Elon Musk is not tackling the hydrogen economy, so to speak. He's working his way from the bottom up now through consumer vehicles. He does have a long-haul truck, the Cybertruck, the Cyber Semi.
Semi?
Tesla Semi.
Tesla Semi.
Sorry, I'm conflating the Cybertruck, which is the pickup, and the Semi. Semi's on the map. It's in development. Its date keeps slipping, so we're talking maybe 2023. But he's going after pure electric, battery-driven long-haul trucks. Then you have Nikola, which is taking a hybrid approach and doing hydrogen-fueled fuel cell EV long-haul trucks. And then there's your approach, which is to retrofit internal combustion engine diesel trucks, Class 8 trucks, put in a fuel cell drivetrain, and pump hydrogen into them, compress that hydrogen so that they have 400 to 500 miles of range, right? So it is really the long-haul market, but I'm trying to get to those economics, and just to play devil's advocate, like, why isn't Elon releasing a hydrogen fuel cell long-haul truck?
Certainly. So I think that Elon has really bet the farm and Tesla on the electric only model. And this is something that, from an outsider's perspective, is, I don't want to say that it is just, I would rather take a multifaceted approach. It would be the way I would say it. So it's very single-minded is what it is. So he has shown a proclivity to only trust in batteries, and disregarding all other potential technologies. So for a number of reasons, we would like to augment that strategy. I think that it was really great that he has built a electric battery car company that is doing very well, because it follows exactly where the market should go and where the government is pushing it because of the low carbon tax credits. So every vehicle he sells, he then gets to sell to a legacy OEM those tax credits, and they have to buy them from that market, and that's just the free exchange of capital as well as ideas, and that is a very really great way to push the market slowly towards a more zero emission solution. Whether or not that is going to translate as well from the car market to the class 3 through 8 bus and truck market has yet to be determined for a couple of different reasons. One, you need more electricity to charge a car, a truck, rather than a car. You also need more batteries. You need at least 5 times as many batteries in one of those Tesla semis as opposed to a regular Tesla vehicle. So where are those batteries going to come from? What materials are we going to utilize? Where are we going to mine those materials from? So this gets into a broader discussion in terms of where we're looking at a circular economy and where we're actually sourcing the materials necessary to actually curb carbon emissions. So I would rather not stop thinking about other ways to get to where we need to go. That's number one. Number two is I would rather, I'm also an economist, so getting to this Occam's razor, right? The simplest solution is usually the best one. So if we can get to less carbon dioxide being emitted from class 3 through 8 trucks and buses in the fastest and cheapest way, let's do it that way first. Let's try that way first, is my model. Because I think that we can do that. I think that we can retrofit enough vehicles to make a very large dent, as opposed to having to raise an additional amount of capital to create a whole new brand of a class 3 through 8 truck and bus and become that type of company. Why don't I just take what's already there on the road and make it zero emission?
I listened to a recent episode of The Energy Gang, I think from October of 2021, where they had Bloom Energy on the show. Bloom was famous for making initially a fuel cell to make electricity, and I think they were using methane and other inputs, but also hydrogen. And then now they're getting in the electrolyzer game, and so playing both sides of that fence. But one of the things that stood out is the PTC, or production tax credit. What is the status of the PTC for hydrogen fuels in the U.S. versus other markets like the European market? And maybe we should bring in a brief discussion of what's going on in Europe, because the Europeans and perhaps the Chinese are going harder, faster after hydrogen, as far as I can tell.
Certainly. So when you're talking about a carbon tax credit, you're really talking about both electric battery vehicles and hydrogen, both electricity and hydrogen. So EVs as well as hydrogen fuel cell vehicles and their charging equipment are able to get the low carbon standard. This is in California, I'm speaking about. It's not actually in the entire United States yet. This would be something that we would certainly support in terms of a tax credit that would be nationwide. This would enable any charging network to get the same type of benefits that a charging network within California would get. In terms of the what's occurring in Europe, a number of different interesting projects are going ahead, which are going to be curbing carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. One such project is both hybrid as well as for pipelines, a hybrid approach for natural gas and hydrogen together. So this process means that you actually blend the two gases together. And above a certain point in terms of the hydrogen mix, you actually have to retrofit the entire pipeline to run on hydrogen. So there are interesting projects that are occurring worldwide, in Australia, in the Middle East, in China, in India, in the United States, and in Europe. So it is what may seem to be a slow process, but we are making traction and we are making headway. And each new idea, each new company, each new iteration brings a new wrinkle into the discussion of how do we get there faster? How do we really curb our emissions and make this planet a better uh, a place for the next generation?
So we just have a few minutes left, Joe, and I want to encourage our listeners to go to your website, allypower.com, if I'm mistaken. If
Ally
I'm not
Power
mistaken.
Inc.
Ally Power Inc. So ALLY powerinc.com. And there's a couple of Ally Powers out there, so there is some brand confusion, so be careful with that. But and we'll put links in the show notes, of course, and let people know how they can reach you. You can also just reach out to me. But in our last few minutes together, Joe, and we can do, we'll bring you back on the show, and you and I have done some events on Clubhouse. We'll keep doing those. If you're not on Clubhouse yet, check that out. That's a audio only social platform. What else should our listeners know about hydrogen for transportation in the next, 12 to 48 months? What is really important for investors and technologists and other companies to be thinking about?
Certainly. So I think that compression is a really big thing to notice and be aware of in the next 12 to 24 months, because there are some really exciting technologies and really exciting companies coming to the fore that may not require compression, which is a big step forward, and B might be able to decrease the cost in terms of the actual tank size. So the cost of a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle right now is estimated, and this is based on grant requests, so it's not an exact science yet, but it's estimated to be around $500,000. The average price for a battery electric vehicle of the same size is somewhere in the range of $200,000. So there's a big chasm in terms of where that price point is, but hydrogen fuel cell vehicles are decreasing in price at a rate that is creating the demand to actually build these vehicles and build out the companies necessary to demand an infrastructure that's going to place them. But within the cost structure of the actual vehicle, let's take the Toyota Mirai, for example. The Toyota Mirai has 3 different tanks in it to take about 5.5 kilograms worth of hydrogen. The price of the actual tank of the compression tank is around $10,000 per tank. So that is really the cost, almost half the price of the car. The Toyota Mirai retails for around $60,000. So the cost of both the batteries within electric battery vehicles, as well as the hydrogen storage within the hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, are really the cost driver for that particular technology. And if we find a way to make that cheaper, then that technology is going to become much more accessible faster.
Yeah, it really is all about how quickly we can get there. We have the technologies we need. We just need to deploy them at scale. Right now we have a hydrogen economy in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, and I know that you've recently been in touch with some companies that are really planning to build that out up and down the West Coast of North America. So that's great for transportation, for there to be a real network there. What do you see in the future for Ally Power? How does this unfold for you? Best case scenario.
Sure. Best case scenario is that we're able to franchise, like the McDonald's model. And what we really want to do is build as fast as possible, because that's where we really see is our ability in the market to access it very, very quickly. We do have that capacity because we're ready to scale right now. So we want to be in California. We want to certainly be on the East Coast, but we also want to take the technology to where it's needed, which is globally. We believe that these vehicles are going to be deployed globally, whether it's EV, whether it's hydrogen fuel cell. We want to give OEMs and customers as many options to choose from. So that means providing the infrastructure that is multiple, that it has multiple use cases in one package. Because we're able to refuel a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, charge an electric battery vehicle, be a storage solution for the grid, and apply grid stability technologies. All of this together is really what our competitive advantage is in the market, and we want to bring it global.
When you say franchise, do you mean franchising the fueling stations or franchising the business that is going to retrofit these long haul trucks, or both?
So we want to franchise the fueling stations. The retrofit model is really based on a service, a retrofit as a service, a hydrofit as a service model. Forgive me, I didn't say retrofit as a service. That's trademarked already. It's hydrofit as a service. We are trademarking hydrofit. So that model is based on reducing your capex as much as possible. So we want to utilize the existing repair facilities that can take a class 3 through 8 truck and bus, put it on a riser, and take out the engine and do the necessary retrofit so that it becomes a zero emission vehicle. And that is really going to reduce the overall cost and that market price markup that you would have in another OEM, because you have to build all new facilities and you have to build a whole new brand and you have to build all the vehicles from scratch. So all of these costs we really want to decrease and streamline the process. So that we get more people who are already employed as mechanics, we get them more work, and we get the economy moving again, even faster than where it should be, back to where it should be, build back better.
And do you have a prediction for when hydrogen fueling will be a thing in places besides California?
So we want to make it a thing next year. And we are talking to the right people right now to make that a reality. The emphasis really has been on the government's paying for a portion of the actual cost of the station. It used to be 70-30 government funded to private equity funded. Now it's swapped. So now the government only pays 30%, and this is the California state government, and the private equity side pays 70%. There are other states now that are following, not as aggressively as California, but they're following some part of that and having grants and having other funding mechanisms so that private industry doesn't have to pay for the full station itself. But private equity does have to play a role, and we do see the ability of private equity to fund these stations and to make a profitable business case going forward. We see this as the greatest opportunity really in the history of capitalism. We're talking about utilities and transportation, huge sectors of the economy that have to change their chemistries and decarbonize. And we're just at the inflection point right now in terms of when we're actually going to be switching over and making that mass exodus from internal combustion engines. So this is the time right now to grab a hold of the nearest company that has the zero emission solution, and hang on for the ride, because we are going to be flipping the script as to what's the percentage of zero emission vehicles going forward.
Yeah, it's a challenge that we humans have of understanding exponential growth and tipping points. I would refer my listeners to Tony Seba, who gives the example of New York City in 1901 versus 1913. In 1901, the same street corner, it's all horse and buggy with one internal combustion engine. Fast forward to 1913, it's all internal combustion engine with one horse and buggy. We had nothing against horses. I mean, their poop is dirty, and it was nice to get rid of that. We didn't have fueling stations. We didn't have that network, right? But the internal combustion engine took us further, faster, more conveniently, and consumers grabbed onto it. Henry Ford made it accessible to everyday people, and away we went, right? It was just an economic wave. That is the situation we're in with electrification of transportation, with the cleaning of the grid, with solar, wind, and battery storage, which are the fastest sources of new energy on the grid. And it's all about economics. It's not about sustainability, unfortunately. Although we need to get more serious about sustainability, the economics are now on our side. Well, thank you so much, Joe Alfred, CEO and founder of Ally Power. Please check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Give us a like, subscribe to whatever your favorite platform is, whether that's our channel on YouTube or on audio only, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts, you can get the Clean Power Hour. I'm Tim Montague, your host. Let's grow solar and storage. Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you, Tim.